Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
So I was listening to Art Bell's Somewhere in Time broadcast from '97, I think, yesterday night while I was working, and it was about vampires. Normally, I'm the kind of guy to laugh at Art's broadcasts. Been listening to it for years regardless, but yesterday not so much. What happened was a bunch of fucking nutjobs kept calling into his vampire line, fancying themselves vampires and shit. One guy even claimed to be a vampire hunter. Guy after that was all butthurt and claimed that the situation was not unlike Germany. Said it was genocide to condone the acts of a mass murderer of probably innocent individuals. This shit was hilarious. It was a circus of crazy individuals with obvious delusions of grandeur. A psychologist would have had a field day with this crowd. What happened next, I probably will never forget. This man called in and sounded incredibly nervous. He was angry that so many people would call in and claim to be something like a vampire, called them wannabe vampires, and wanted to set the record straight on several points. When pressed if he was the real deal, as Art put it, he reluctantly said yes. For several minutes he droned on about some of the shit these people said. He brought up that HIV and such, something a past caller said vampires had an issue with, was not an issue, because they could smell it through their skin. Note his utter disgust when mentioning it. After that, he brought up how he found it odd that people did not like the idea of blood. He went on about it something like this: "You know, I don't know how you people can say that what I do is sick when you take this yellow goo from eggs and cook it to have the aroma of fresh meat. It's disgusting. All meat is disgusting. It's vile and filled with impurities and imperfections. Blood has all the nutrients from that flesh, it's just filtered so that it's cleaner. And that's the best way to feed. From another vampire. The blood has been filtered twice." After, he went on about how he was trying to return to his human state. Said that you did not have a soul when you are a vampire, and that you are not killed, you are destroyed. He said he wanted to die, not be destroyed. He talked about how he had heard that there were ways to turn back, and that is what he was trying to do. When pressed by Art to how he had been turned, he finally said it was because of his father. His father was attacked and tried quite successfully to defend himself. He was killed after that. It would be his final punishment to see his son, the caller, become one of those monsters, and he has been ever since. The caller spoke in a way that sounded like deep regret for his actions, and you could tell he did not want to be a vampire. He was scared of his late attackers and also feared that they would be coming back for him. He said that there may be some innocent victims in this game, but there are some that just need to be hunted down and destroyed. The thing that bugged me about this caller was the way he spoke, the subtleties in his words and his general demeanor. He did not want to say how old he was. He did not want to give too much information. He called on a phone line that would not track or record his whereabouts. He spoke about meat in such disgust and blood in such reverence. He acted like a man in his situation would act, to the T. The way he spoke and his actions gave off such a creepy feeling even over the radio, and that's what stuck with me. I still do not know if I believe what he said, but I honestly don't think that matters. For all intensive purposes, he was a vampire. Physically, he may be no different from you or I, but mentally, he was a fucking vampire. What do you guys think? Could guys like this really be out there? Could the monsters he was so scared of be out there right now, prowling the night?
It is well known that there are larger tunnel systems built by the emperors decades ago under Vienna's inner city, and you can sightsee parts of it. It is no surprise that those tunnels and the sewerage itself were and are used as shelters by homeless people. Max Winter, for example, made social reports about the so-called Strater, persons making a living off the dirt down there at the beginning of the 20th century. Pick related. These days I watched an Austrian TV show about religious mania and stuff. Two women practicing mediumship mentioned something like an urban legend about Vienna, that these days there is at least one person living down there that is believed to be a vampire. Also, people are said to be bitten, but according to the interviewed women, these cases never go out to the public. It was laughable to me at first, but then I remembered a strange encounter one night with a pale, homeless man, dressed in long black clothes wearing a dirty head bandage, just like after an injury stirring through the litter bins. Strange feelings hit me when he looked at me before rushing on. Never felt something like this before, and again, somehow bad. I believe in social studies, so normally I like watching people. So what's going on in Vienna, a city from which Bram Stoker took inspiration? What are these rumors all about? Just scary homeless people.
Nice try, kid. But vampires never existed before the Victorian era. They are a pulp culture fantasy.
You can't actually believe this. Been around for fucking centuries, kid.
Name one example of a modern vampire before 1600.
You kind of contradict yourself. I mean, a modern vampire from before 1600 would not be considered modern now. But I'll begin at the beginning, before man settled in Egypt. Legend holds that the sun god Ra sent his daughter Sekhmet down to punish humankind for their disobedience. But after Sekhmet couldn't stop drinking blood amid her slaughter, Ra quelled her planet-draining thirst by dyeing a bunch of beer red. Basically, she guzzled it all and slept for 3 days. Lilith, a 4,000-year-old figure in Abrahamic folklore who, in some stories, was Adam's wife before Eve, had a monstrous rep in ancient Babylonia. Her name derives from a Sumerian word for female demons or wind spirits, Lilitu. According to scholar J.A. Skurlock, the Babylonians believed the Lilitu were hungry for victims because they had once been human, and slipped through windows into people's houses looking for victims to take the place of husbands and wives whom they themselves never had. In the Philippines, for example, there's the Manananggal, who some believe can shapeshift into a woman and sucks blood from the bellies of pregnant women and hates garlic. We've long associated vampires with Transylvania, an historic region of Romania, in large part because it's where the fictional Dracula originally hailed from. And that was an intentional choice on Bram Stoker's part, due to the area's superstitions. In Romania, fears of the strigoi, once human monsters who need blood to survive, have circulated for hundreds of years. Another facet of ancient Egyptian belief that prompted vampiric consideration was the Ka, an astral companion to each living person. The Ka was a symbol of the life powers given to each man from the gods. It is the source of these powers. The Ka was said to be a spiritual double that was born with every man and lived on after he died, but only if it had a place to live. The Ka lived within the body of the individual and therefore needed that body after death. This is the reason why the Egyptians mummified their dead, because if the body decomposed, their spiritual double, their Ka, would die, and the deceased would lose their chance for eternal life. You see, the belief was that the Ka guided a person while they were alive, but once they died, the Ka would lead the soul, the Ba or Ku, into eternity. Also, the Egyptian fear that future generations would forget them was very strong. The reason the mortuary cults recited the names of the deceased at their tomb was because they believed that if a person's name was forgotten, that individual perished forever. With the fall of the New Kingdom in 1070 BC, many foreign kings took over and occupied Egypt. The Babylonians, Libyans, Nubians, and later the armies of Alexander the Great marched across Egypt, bringing with them their own legends and beliefs. The Ptolemies, named after Ptolemy, general of Alexander the Great, ruled Egypt until Rome conquered Cleopatra and Mark Antony, and therefore Greek, Babylonian, and other customs were adopted and combined with the older philosophical beliefs of Egypt. All of this has led certain scholars to believe that the original idea of vampires came from ancient Egypt.
Since the Middle Ages, Romania has been renowned for vampires. In the kingdoms and dominions of Transylvania, Wallachia, and Moldavia, that the tales of vampires are more abundant than anywhere else. Romanian folklore remained infallible despite interventions that were historically present from the Romans, the Hungarians, and the Ottoman Turks. Romania maintained absolute rules and regulations in obstructing the dead from coming back to life. Traditional Romanians believed that the initial sign of one being or becoming a vampire was the birth of a child under abnormal circumstances. Some of these circumstances included a child being born out of wedlock, born with a caul, the amniotic membrane that surrounds a fetus, or death occurring before a baptismal could be performed. If a person was aware of their irregular births, they would leave instructions upon their deaths to have the necessary precautions taken. preventing them from rising again as one of the undead. It was also believed that if a woman was with child and did not consume salt or was to be gazed upon by a vampire, especially one past her 6th month of pregnancy, that her child was doomed to eternal damnation of becoming one of the undead. The only way to redeem the unborn child's soul was to seek the blessing of the church. Yet another belief regarding vampires and the birth of a child was to be born the 7th son of the 7th son, or likewise the 7th daughter of the 7th daughter. They were said to sometimes be born with a tail and could eventually become a vampire. Although odd births were the most prevalent in beliefs of one becoming a vampire in Romania, it was not the only way one could become a member of the undead. If someone was bitten, they could become a vampire. If someone lived a wicked life, such as practicing witchcraft, committed suicide, had sworn a false oath, was excommunicated by the church, or their corpse was leaped over by a cat, they were prime vampire candidates. A vampire was always suspected if sudden death struck consistently in a family or livestock, followed by the passing of either a family member or of someone who was questioned about being a vampire. It was said that vampires were known to appear to their families on occasion, especially females, since they wanted to be around their children. They would return to their mortal residency and make their presence known by throwing items around or getting into the food. The vampire would then begin to assault family members and livestock and then move its way on to the villagers. If the vampires were not annihilated, they could possibly move on to more distant villages and also other countries where they would re-establish themselves into society as mortals, and no one would be the wiser. The Feast of St. Andrew, accompanied with the Feast of St. George and Easter, was acknowledged as one of the most feared times of the year in Romania. The Feast of St. Andrew was in honor of St. Andrew, who was the patron of wolves and donor of garlic. It was on St. Andrew's Eve, in certain parts of Romania, that the vampire was believed to be the most active and dangerous. The vampires were also believed to continue their activity throughout the winter and rest at Epiphany, January. During these perilous times, it was considered wise to rub garlic on the doors and windows to protect families within the residence from any vampire attacks. Livestock was also at risk of an attack, so precautions were taken with them as well by rubbing them down with garlic. Romanians took every precaution against becoming a vampire or harming anyone if they did become one. Graves were carefully watched for any signs that signified a disturbance. Such signatures of a vampire's presence could be a small hole located near the headstone. It was believed that a vampire could enter and leave their grave through this hole. Upon observing this, the deceased would be exhumed. If the corpse was found to be red in the face, it was without a doubt a vampire. Other signs of the corpse being a vampire was if the corpse was found lying face down in the coffin accompanied by fresh blood upon it, or, on occasion, traces of cornmeal would be found. Also, one foot might be found pulled in at one corner of the coffin. Another customary practice amongst the Romanians was to dig up the graves of the departed 3 years following the death of a child, 4 to 5 years following the death of a young person, and 7 years following the death of an adult. If only skeletal remains were found, they would be cleansed and returned to their graves. But if the corpse was found to be fleshly preserved, it was then believed to be a vampire, and dealt with in the manner as all vampires were. If while alive one was believed to be vampire-prone, many precautions were taken with their burial upon their death. Sometimes garlic would be placed in the corpse's mouth, or millet seeds would be placed in the coffin to postpone the vampire, who would have to go through a lengthy process of eating them before they could rise from their grave, or a thorny branch of the wild rose may be placed in their coffin. Once the vampire-prone deceased member was buried, a distaff would be driven into the ground above the grave in belief that the vampire would impale itself if it tried to rise from its grave. On the anniversary of the death of a vampire-prone subject, the family would walk around the grave. More harsher preventive measures would be to stake the corpse with iron or wood, either in the heart or the navel. Sometimes the body would be buried face down and reversed in the coffin. And on more extreme levels, the corpse would be removed from the grave and to the woods to be dismembered. The heart and liver would first be removed, and then the rest of the body would be burned piece by piece. The ashes would then be preserved and mixed with water and given to the family members to drink to prevent any vampire attacks,
I'm from Romania, and my great-grandfather used to be a vampire slayer. And not in a meme way, it was an actually licensed profession around here until the early 1900s, when grave digging was outlawed. People would pay you to come and dig up the graves of their dead relatives, who they believed were vampires, and drive a wooden stake through their hearts. My grandfather still has his old books and writings somewhere in the house. I will look for them next time I visit him and post them here. I remember reading one of them when I was younger, and it had a lot of information on vampires and how to identify a real case, and not just a personal vendetta of the villagers who would try to desecrate the corpse of someone who died and owed them money or other stuff like that. The conditions were very specific, such as unbaptized children, people who drowned, hanged themselves or got shot, already dead people over which a black cat has passed over. It is still the tradition to this day to lock a corpse in a room with no mirrors or where animals have access before the burying ritual is completed by the priest. Also, there was information on how to melt silver and make different objects from it, the exact measurement and how to make a wooden stake, how to dig up a grave, etc. I also heard stuff from my grandfather about Prikoliki and Iele, local names for werewolves, dogman and fairies, which he knew from his dad and have also been a part of the local paranormal folklore for centuries. I'm more interested to see if I can find any information in the books about those.
In 1926, Agnes Mergoci wrote in English pages on Romanian folklore, the ways to determine if any dead man is a vampire. 1. His household, his family, and his livestock, and possibly even the livestock of the whole village, die off rapidly. 2. He comes back in the night and speaks with the family. He may eat what he finds in dishes and knock things about, or he may help with the housework and cut wood. Female vampires also come back to their children. There was a Hungarian vampire which could not be kept away, even by the priest in holy water. 3. The priest reads a service at the grave. If the evil which is occurring does not cease, it is a bad sign. 4. A hole about the size of a serpent may be found near the tombstone of the dead man. If so, it is a sign of a vampire, because vampires come out of graves with just such holes. 5. Even in the daytime, a white horse will not walk over the grave of a vampire, but stands still and snorts and neighs. 6. A gander, similarly, will not walk over the grave of a vampire. 7. On exhuming the corpse, if it is a vampire, it will be found to be 1. Red in the face even for months and years after burial. 2. With the face turned downwards. 3. With a foot retracted and forced into a corner of the grave or coffin. 4. If relations have died, the mouth will be red with blood. If it has only spoiled and ruined things at home and eaten what it could find, the mouth will be covered with maize meal. The most common vampire species in Romania were the strigoi. The strigoi are a breed of undead vampire, compared to the Romanian living vampire, the moroi. A strigoi is said to have red hair and blue eyes, moves very slowly with their right eye closed but their left eye always open. Sometimes the vampire would look bloated with blood. The strigoi drank blood like most vampires, but could also eat normal human food. It is said to also be able to draw energies from people, leaving them weak, sickly, and helpless. Other than attacking people, the strigoi would also spread disease.
I was about 17, 18 years old, in a village in Romania's countryside. This place has strong beliefs in paranormal, and strange things happen more often than you would think. That's why we sometimes, to show off courage, teenagers in a village, would go to the cemetery in the night. We've made 3-4 trips in 2 months of summer in 2014, with bones shaking and scared that we might encounter something bad like a spirit or vampire or God knows what. We were usually minimum 3 people. Apart from a few noises and a creepy feeling, nothing particular ever happened, except for one night when myself and 3 other friends decided to go to the cemetery again. We had beer, smokes, and maybe having in mind the other nights when nothing happened. We were joking, relaxed, but things were about to get really spooky. So we were in the middle of the cemetery, drinking. and one of the boys told us that he would go alone until the end of the cemetery. He'd gone uphill and suddenly stopped. He looks forward, then backward, then forward again, and steps back to the gang. His voice was shaking and told us, "Come with me." We've gone uphill, and at approximately 20 meters away at one of the funerary stones, we could see a candle burning in front, and apparently a woman with her head covered facing the stone pick related. But we could not see her body. One of the guys made some noise. She turned her head towards us, and you could only see her eyes shining. No nose, no mouth. She stared for 2 seconds at us and turned her head towards the stone. At that point, I noticed she had no body. My friends noticed at that point and started to run towards the other side of the cemetery. One of my friends lost his flip-flops while running. It was so creepy it still haunts me this day.
All we have to go upon are traditions and superstitions. These do not at the first appear much, yet must we be satisfied in the first place because we have to be, no other means is at our control, and secondly because after all these things, tradition and superstition are everything. Does not the belief in vampires rest on them? Bram Stoker, Dracula. Strigoi Vin is the plural for Strigoi View, the Romanian word meaning approximately living vampire witch. This is a spiritual and esoteric initiatory system which can be practiced on a solitary basis or on a formal basis within the Ordo Strigoi Vin, OSV. The term Strigoi Vin refers to the teachings, culture, philosophy, and magic of this specific approach to this path of the living vampire witch. Strigoi Vin is defined here as a form of vampiric witchcraft, sharing many elements with modern neo-paganism and other esoteric systems, yet still remaining very unique. Many great thinkers such as Aristotle, William Blake, Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, Ayn Rand with her philosophy of objectivism, and Ragnar Redbeard, author of Might is Right, have expressed elements of the path perspectives in various ways. However, it must be noted that the elements of Strigoi Vin philosophy are only partially revealed by these viewpoints or thinkers. Moreover, many of these authors unfortunately include mortal sentiments objectionable to the Strigoi Vin, along with their more excellent philosophies. You can also see elements of spiritual and esoteric perspectives of Strigoi Vin reflected throughout history in the esoteric realms, including the chaos magic of Peter J. Carroll, Sumerian and Egyptian magic, Hinduism, Buddhism, the Thelema of Magus Aleister Crowley, shamanism, Gnostic teachings, Judo-Christian mysticism, esotericism, and Hermetic magic from ancient times. Strigoi Vin is about celebrating and engaging in the life, not a celebration of death like the Gothic movement of the modern era and preconceptions of other vampiric paths. The philosophy is divided into two distinct paradigms, the path of day, temporal and philosophical, and the path of night, eternal and spiritual. The path of day embraces reality as objective secular humanist from the objective reality of the five senses, while the path of night is a contrast that engages the spiritual, esoteric, and paranormal, yet not the supernatural. These two paths allow the living vampire to explore two realities as they see fit and find the power in both. Thus, the Strigoi Vin is a spirit of equilibrium, light and dark, not one of depressed and macabre creatures of the night. The process of syncretism is defined as reading between the lines and seeing the elements of the Strigoi Vin mysteries in disparate myths, stories, and thoughts, then putting them back together into greater and more practical truths. As Strigoi VII, as an initiatory path, focuses on seeking the truth and reason through the individual's insight as well as that of other wise ones. For the last millennia since the end of the days of traditional Kemet, better known as today as ancient Egypt, the foundations of what evolved into the Strigoi Vin mysteries have been in the shadows, working in secrecy on a solitary basis with our ancestors. We remain hidden in plain sight. Although it feels like I'm casting some pearls before swine, here is an excerpt from the Purple Veils. Within the vampire mysteries, undeath means maintaining a disembodied conscious existence between the first and second death and preserving the self, hence the term undead. This is the ultimate goal of Jepper, the metamorphosis from human to ascended master, and where in vampirism immortality takes place. Vampires can escape the cycle of life and death. In order to avoid the second death and achieve undeath, the vampire has the goal to strengthen the subtle body during life, through the circuit of feeding and communion, master energy manipulation, and perform out-of-body projection, OBE. In truth, the vampiric art is feeding from excess human life force in order to preserve the subtle body and become undead. The second death usually takes a few hours, days, or weeks following the physical first death. During the second death, human consciousness feels a strong draw and pull toward the dream matrix, which is the point where near-death experiences, NDEs, take place. The consciousness enters a dreamlike euphoric state that allows the individual to accept their fate and the true death. The vampire's first goal in Jepper is to fight and ultimately defeat the second death. The vampire wants to preserve their self, personality, memories, and identity, and therefore ascend into immortality of the self. During the second death, the soul is released and goes on to join the energy of the universe or whatever afterlife there may be. This is a fate the true vampire cannot tolerate, and they consider the second death the ultimate adversary of vampirism. When done properly, feeding is healthy for the donor. It removes stagnant energies, grounds the donor, and can be very sensually pleasurable for the donor. Vampires never physically or mentally harm their donors. They never feed from someone in poor health and do not feed deeply from children or the elderly. Likewise, it is not wise or respectful for vampires to feed from each other or other awakened beings without consent. Feeding is natural for vampire. Due to mortal societal conditioning, some vampires may initially find it hard to assume the predator mentality that facilitates the flow of feeding and intentionally harvest energy. They will feed ineffectively or not at all. This limits their energy intake of life force and vampiric abilities. Feeding is the secret key to Jepper, so a vampire who does not feed limits themselves to suffering the second death. Feeding is a part of the natural cycle of life. All the world is a vampire and every being exchanges energy. In nature, as Charles Darwin and other scientists explained, it is the survival of the fittest. Every living thing competes for survival. In the web of life, the wolf gains strength and life by preying upon the deer, which in turn survives by eating grass. The chlorophyll in grass absorbs energy from the light of the sun. Every living entity survives by taking the energy of living flora and fauna. The vampire is simply training themselves to tap consciously into this flow of energy. Feeding on the radiated life force of others is not unethical, any more than holding hands or hugging for warmth on a cold day is unethical. Vampires feed for the purpose of survival and evolution, not to harm or exploit their donors. Vampiric feeding is a completely natural and ethical act.
Cringe. A vampire using the internet and LARPing on 4chan is absurd. There are not vampires anymore. The closest you may find is one or two locked in a tomb in remote Russia, somewhere sleeping. They did exist mostly in Eastern Europe and the Russian steppe, and perhaps throughout Central Asia and Iran, etc., hundreds of years ago. They were never sexy, shirtless studs or lords of castles. They were black magicians who made deals with demons which they would have to pay at death. Therefore, they prolonged death by any means possible. They learned an art by which consuming blood, the life force of others, kept them alive. But much like skinwalker magic, the price you pay is extreme. You had to abandon all of your humanity and recondition your existence being 100% evil, so that no goodness resided in you. There may have also been a kind of vampire virus that afflicted normal people in Eastern Europe, wherein upon death they would become vampires. This may have been due to the magic of an actual, real ancient vampire in the area. But these were more like succubi or incubi, and were not even conscious of their behavior. They were like zombies reanimated using fresh corpses. The souls of the dead had already moved on. These are the creatures who villagers would stake through the heart and find filled with blood, etc. My theory is there were one or two real vampires in Eastern Europe during the Middle Ages who learned a new way to consume the life force of others. Rather than going out themselves to harvest victims, which is dangerous, they would reanimate fresh corpses and empower them with vampiric spirits. These vampires would leave their graves at night, either physically but more likely on the astral plane, and drain the blood of the living. The vampire sustains its own thirst and the demon within enjoys the blood, but a portion of it is drawn out by the real vampire, the black magician, through magical means. He then uses that essence to prolong his life, although his life is less and less physical. Over centuries, the vampire magician loses his ability to remain on the physical plane. This is probably why he would use proxies. Thus, over time, the practitioners of this dark art, which flourished in Asia and Russia, withdrew to the lower astral. They may now be shadow people such as the Hatman who live a parasitic existence feeding on the life force of others. It is nearly impossible to find such a being still in physical incarnation unless, as I said, they are in stasis in a tomb somewhere, likely prolonging the disintegration into the astral. They could awaken, but then they would probably once again use the freshly deceased as proxies to feed.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.